ಅವರಿಗೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. We can't wait to hear your thoughts in the sessions to come. The next session, rather the very first session, as I was telling you, how to discover your own Gita. And that is Devdutt Pattanaik in conversation with Mani Rao. All set to begin. The organizers would like about a few minutes of time. Yeah, they are here. All right. Good news that. So ladies and gentlemen, here we are. I'm Vasanthi. I have introduced myself in the beginning, and I have the pleasure of introducing someone who had nothing less than 1 million hits for his popular talk. Chances are that you've already watched it. You watched him on television. Myths that mystify. East versus West. And his television shows such as Business Sutra on CNBC TV 18 and Devlok on Epic TV. He is a consultant to corporations on culture, diversity and leadership. We all could do with a lot more of Gyan on that. He's also a story consultant to so many television channels and filmmakers, and mainly writes on relevance of mythology in modern times, especially management and leadership. He was trained in medicine. I don't know how many of you know that. He worked for 15 years in the healthcare and pharma industries with a brief stint as a business consultant in Ernst & Young before he focused on his passion full time. And are we glad or what? Author of 30 books, 600 articles, with bestsellers such as Jaya, Sita, Business Sutra, and the 7 Secret series, and the Devlok series of children books. Please put your hands together to have Devdutt Pattanaik on stage. Facilitating this conversation is a poet and translator, and I'd like to invite her on stage. She's the author of 8 books of poetry, including new and selected poems published by Poetry Wala 2014, and 2 books in translation. A poem translation of Bhagavad Gita, Fingerprint 2015, and Kalidasa for the 21st Century Reader. And this was a finalist for the Lucian Struck Prize. Her essays, poems, and other writings are on manirao.com, where she also blogs. May we have Mani Rao to, have this conversation started.
Already being done. I don't think, yeah, now it is.
No. Okay.
Now it is, yeah. Since we've already been introduced, I think we just head straight into the conversation.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to open with a very broad question. The Gita tradition has got a lot of translations and has got numerous commentaries even before that. Of course, in our own tradition, the translation has just been basically 5 things: Anuvad, and then syntax, and then the Bhashya. And in the last couple of 100 years, we have translations. It is the Itihasa Purana tradition, actually, that has retellings.
Yes.
Rather than that of the authoritative text. However, what you have done is you have taken a text that is considered authoritative, canonical, and called it a retelling and recast it through your own lens. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to that decision to take such a move and to be so upfront about calling it a retelling?
You see, I've been studying, I have approached Indian thought through mythology. So stories, symbols and rituals are my basic. I don't approach it through philosophy. So I don't approach it through Adi Shankaracharya. I don't approach it through philosophy at all. In fact, this is the first time I've approached a purely philosophical text. But for me, it's not a philosophical text. It's a dialogue which is taking place in a battle, which is taking place in a larger narrative. What happens is there is a tendency, and I don't know when it started, there's this high culture and low culture. And in a way, it began with the Greeks, where they separated philosophy from poetry. So Homer is not given the same importance as Socrates. Socrates is the philosopher, and Homer is just a bard. So that there is a division there. When the Renaissance and the scientific revolution took place, the same hierarchy emerged in Europe. And when the colonial powers came to India, that's the hierarchy they brought into India, and we accepted it. And therefore, Itihasa Purana gets a lower status than a philosophical bhashya. And
the irony, though, is that the Gita is actually a part of the Itihasa Purana.
Yes. So that's where I was coming from. And I just want to clarify. See, the session is about discovering your Gita. So it's for the audience. So it's a conversation between you and me. Right? So I wanted to also ask you questions, if that's allowed. Yeah. And my thing is, as a poet, I can understand as a mythologist, because I was writing Mahabharata, Gita comes, I stumble upon Gita and becomes this thing. As a poet who has been writing your own poetry, and you have been writing your own experiences in your poetry, what drew you to the Gita?
My approach is also different from the previous translations. For me, what happened was when I read Gita for the very first time, I was completely shocked. I had thought that the Gita was this rather tedious text that I would one day turn to if I was going to get more serious about reflecting about things. When I read it, it was a poetic experience for me.
Okay.
And the poetic and the spiritual came together, right?
Okay.
And when I say it was a poetic experience, what I mean is the language has a simplicity, but at the same time, it's very carefully done. There's a lot of wordplay, there are a lot of pairs, there is assonance, there's a lot of drama in it. Yeah. So, for example, the usual way, and what I felt had happened is through the centuries, it has become a monotonous text that only happens when you retire or you want to do something seriously religious, right? So, the very first verse, the standard way of rendering it would be like this: Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samavetayu. That's the standard way. But when I read it in Sanskrit, this is how I read it. Yeah? Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samavetayu yutsavaha mamaka pandavaschaiva kimakurvata sanjaya. That is the whole mood, all of the stuff that has gone on in the background, but in the context which you bring so well, into the whole narrative, you bring that back into the narrative.
Yes. See,
so that is missing.
It's right, because I was reading you are one of my recommended readings in the book.
I know. Thank you.
Because when I would read you brought it out in the introduction, and for me that became in fact, after reading what you had read and some other, it suddenly made sense that the first chapter of my book should talk on the concept of darshan.
Yes.
Seeing. Darshan, you go to the temple and everybody's saying do darshan. And it has always excited me or intrigued me that the Mahabharata is the story of a king who is blind and a queen who is blindfolded. And the Gita is being told by their servant, who is the Sutta, who has telepathic sight. Yes. And the structure, I'm obsessed with structure because storytelling is about structure. And you have Sanjaya, who has telepathic sight but no authority. And you have Dhritarashtra, who has all the authority but no sight. Is it to be taken literally? Is it to be taken metaphorically? Is Dhritarashtra out there somewhere 2,000 years ago or 3,000 or 10,000 years ago, depending on which school of thought you belong to? Or is Dhritarashtra within me, who is blind and who is saying, oh my God, there is so much problems in the world, and we know even Bangalore Lit Festival has become Kurukshetra. Am I the Dhritarashtra who is saying, oh my God, Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre, what is happening? And very clearly in the first paragraph, and you bring it out very subtly, my sons and Pandu's sons, not my nephews. Not my nephews. He's related to him, but he's saying my sons, Mamaka, and then Sanskrit is not my strong point, but for me that sentence structure was important. Pandu's son. Pandu is your brother. And in that one paragraph, the problem has been stated. You are saying, this is mine, this is not mine. So property has come in, dispute has come in, war has come in, but the blind man can't see. Which is the world, right?
The fascinating thing is that this frame, which is at the beginning and it's at the end, it's just a touch, but just that frame defines so much.
Yes.
And as far as the war and the Kurukshetra is concerned, the way that Gandhi took it was that it's an internal war between us, and that the Kauravas and the Pandavas are inside us, and it's a war, it's an allegory, is how he took it. So each person is obviously free to take it as they wish. If you apply your structure of how Sanjaya is the one with the vision, let's say that that's the Bhashyakara for the moment, hopefully the reader is not blind Dhritarashtra, right? Because the reader actually has a point of view. And
that becomes exciting because when you look at the last paragraph and how he ends when Sanjaya he's a transmitter. He's not commenting at all. He's just saying, this is what he is like a proper transmitter. But at the end, he's giving his opinion. The last paragraph, he says, he who reads the Gita will get. And suddenly you see all the points that he's saying that what will you benefit from? What will you get when you read the Gita? He is using words like stability, Vijaya, success, Bhu, earth, sovereignty, Shri.
Very material
Very
things.
material things. So it is nothing to do, it's not Moksha Shastra happening over there. Here the Sanjaya is saying, when you read the Gita, you will get stability, you'll get Dhruva, you will get, which is stability, you will get, he uses Niti, you'll get law. He's asking about just general social happiness. He's talking about the good life.
This is also very traditional in our culture, which is that when you understand something spiritual in a deep and a real way, you are able to live your life better.
Yes.
So you link the two. It is not an abandonment of what you have around you. The body and the Atman are all integrated into one self. So it totally brings that whole point to the nice conclusion at the end. And actually, I would say that in your Gita, this is going to be about my Gita and your Gita. In your Gita, you have emphasized this sort of turn away from renunciation and monastic orders into the samsara.
Yes.
And I think in that you were trying to do some restorative work. Am I right?
Yes. You say, see, my Gita is informed by your Gita. Okay. So it's, I can turn it into a territorial that this is mine and that is yours, which is how many people see. Whenever I use the word my, I say, but my can include yours. So I am indebted to Mani Rao's work and to the works of scholars like
If
you.
I rewrite mine, it will include yours.
And that's where the magic happens, right? I influence you, you influence me. This is samavad. We are in this world of vivad. I don't like the word argument. I personally have a complete disgust for the word argument because argument has become about victory.
So they're discussing Indians.
Yes, it's discussing it. The argumentative, because we have glamorized the word because the Europeans like it. Because the European academic structure is based on argumentation and refutation, which is in principle violent.
And conclusion.
And conclusionary based. While Indian thought is always been about samavad, each one informing the other, khatta, meetha, you keep improving, keep going in cycles. Knowledge is never concluded because which is the scientific way. Science is always growing all the time.
That is also one of my efforts, which is to turn the text into an open text. And in the Ishavasya, which is actually in this book, that's what I've tried to do, which is to show how, for example, what happens is when you have two terms, those terms get one meaning.
Yes.
Through one doctrinal perspective. The people who follow that perspective think that that's
Correct.
the absolute
Yes.
meaning. And they don't know that everybody who's reading the other perspectives have others. So in my translation of, let's say, Sambhuti and Asambhuti, I've actually questioned what did they mean once and what do they mean now? And here are 8 ways that they could mean.
Yes.
So the reader who approaches it is told all the possibilities.
Yes.
And you reopen the text for the future.
See, that brings me to the point when you talk about restorative work. I noticed something interesting. The Bhashyas start about 1,000. The Gita is 2,000 years old. The script, the text is about 2,000 years old. The commentaries start 1,000 years ago. So there's a 1,000-year gap between the two. Shankara starts writing it. He is a celibate monk.
Okay.
Ramanuja writes it, who walks away from married life. Madhava, again, monastic traditions. So the top writers...
And they're all men.
And they're all men. They're all celibate. They're running away, or well, withdrawing from. We shall not say that. They are finding larger happiness outside the family. And we are telling that is wisdom. I'm sure there's someone who's willing to argue about it. But the point is, so then Jnaneshwar writes, young boy who is a monk, and suddenly you realize all the monks are writing this about a dialogue which took place on a battlefield which was brutally about war, land, property, inheritance, vengeance, blood. And I'm like, wait a minute, there is something shifted. The Mahakavyas are being writing about material day-to-day life. The Bhashyas are written by men who don't want to deal with women, they don't want to deal with children, they don't want to deal with parents. They don't want to deal with it because there's something higher outside apparently. And I wanted to question that. I don't want to give power just because somebody has told me to give them power. I want to ask myself, what happened in India between this time? And the historicity of it. And therefore the other Gitas became important. Therefore Vyadha Gita, I begin with the Vyadha Gita. The other Gitas, many people don't know them. You're familiar with and I've read in your essays. Vyadha Gita is the butcher's Gita. So I begin with the butcher's Gita. Butcher, oh my God. But he's singing the Gita and telling the hermit, go back to the household. And I end with the Kama Gita, which is the god of desire, talking about Gita. So suddenly you have sex and violence, talking the Gita and telling people that, wait a minute, this monastic way of looking at things, which valorizes celibacy and renunciation, is one ingredient in the Indian kitchen. It is not the only ingredient.
I have my own theory about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably, I mean, of course, there are many Gitas, but this is the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah? And that word Bhagavat makes all the difference. And that is probably why this text for the first, I mean, that had that attention where it is plucked out of the context of the Mahabharata and it becomes the word of God,
yes.
Ishvara,
Yes.
Bhagavan and Krishna. So it gets that authority. Second thing is, I believe that some of what you're talking about this conflict between monasticism and samsara, is a perception. Ideally speaking, the idea is, of course, that the monastic is giving up a limited samsara to embrace the larger samsara. So the monk is not sort of restricted to his family or her family,
Yes.
but the whole world becomes the family, and then they spend their whole life in doing service to that.
Yes, yes.
So it's not actually technically it's not a running away. I think the problem is that of perception.
Yeah. You see, the Mahabharata is a war.
Yes.
So it's a literal war. So I'm going to be a little mischievous now.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So if the whole world is your family, who are your wives? And you know the problem, because there is a power struggle over here. The power struggle comes because when I talk to young people and I hear a perception and that affects the larger Indian context. The sense that wealth is bad, that sex is bad. And I'm like, where did this judgment come from? Because money is bad, but yet you want money, so you hide the fact that you are working hard for a better life, which involves money. And there is a shame associated with wealth. There is a shame associated with pleasure. Let's go to Krishna. When we describe Krishna, we are describing a man who, he's called the Purna Avatar because he embraces Shringar.
Yes.
He embraces eroticism. He embraces sensuality. That is why Purna Avatar. Ram does not have these characteristics. Shringar and the eroticism is restrained because he's the king. He keeps a restraint. This part, so it's ironical that the Bhagavad Gita of a god, imagine him on the battlefield, flamboyant in his silk clothes, wearing Vanamali around him, alta in his hand. Women wear valta, but here is the Purana Purusha wearing alta, having a plate like a girl. Because if you look at the traditional art forms, nobody sees the back of the image. Krishna always has a plate. So there is a queerness about it.
And he speaks of his womb.
And he speaks of his womb. Yoni, he mentioned, there are 2 wombs I have. These are the 2 wombs. The language is so modern. And then on the other side, I see this person who is talking about without this embrace of sensuality. For me, this is...
It's time for us to get into the...
The new act has come in. And therefore, I think the world has changed. The younger generation is willing to listen to a conversation where pleasure is important, wealth, power.
Yes.
Look at academia. We talk about agency. We talk about power. We're talking about Marxist philosophies, capitalism. So the Kurukshetra is becoming, it's a different world emerging. And people are ready to receive this language.
Yes. I think the problem is that the focus has been so much on that Atman section.
Yes.
And in school... kids learn, the Atman is immortal, it cannot be burnt by fire, cannot be pierced by knives, and they think, what is Atman? Who knows what is Atman? We haven't seen it. Yes. Have you seen it? You're a translator or you're a bhashyakara, you don't know what that is either. So they're not able to connect to it. And therefore what happens is it gets relegated to a side. But in fact, the Gita has a lot of very interesting information about how to live.
Yes.
How to live in a detached manner. How does food affect your body?
Yeah.
How to have equanimity. These are all things that are really important in life and in samsara. So I
going
think,
to the technicalities of, when you're doing your work, you keep, when we were talking earlier also, you keep using words like texture. We don't, it's sometimes only a poet will use words like texture when talking about a text. Can you just sort of explain what it was? It was quite exciting
Yeah, so there is text, obviously, and there is shabda which has artha, which has meaning. There's word and meaning. The texture is everything else.
Okay.
And we have a long tradition of Indian poetics also that talks of dhvani. Even to understand that words have meanings, there is spota, which is like the intuitive consciousness that sort of sinks and gathers all the meaning of something and then connects it to other things. Texture is noticing the poetics of it. For example, in the Sanskrit Gita, maybe I'll try to give an example of a section. In the section where Arjuna is talking to Krishna about I see, he says, Pashyami tava devan dehe. He says, each thing he says, Pashyami, Pashyami, Pashyami. He's talking of all the things he's seeing, right? And when you read it in the Sanskrit, you cannot miss that point, that this is a darshan. He is seeing this Vishwarupam darshan. So in my translation, I've actually emphasized that verb by plucking it out of the sentence and putting it on the left. So it is I see. And then matome, I get it. I see, I get it. They see you, the Adityas and the Rudras. I see you. So the whole emphasis is actually like really churning around that verb and that action that is going on. Similarly, when Arjuna is talking about, how his bow is slipping and his hair is, he's having horripilations. And in that, there are so many personal pronouns in that section. You cannot miss it if you're reading it in Sanskrit. But in the English translations, you don't get that texture.
Yeah, you pointed to that one of the structures where you use I, me, my. So Arjuna is speaking and you suddenly realize he's continuously using the words like I, me, my.
He's
and when
full of himself. Yeah.
And that's what led me to sort of wonder about this concept, because it's me. And he's saying, oh my God, I can't fight my cousins. I can't fight, they're my relatives. And that is where my, a penny dropped, and much of my structure of my book is shaped by that, because the idea of Paramatma emerges, and I saw it in this way, and this is
I love that.
So, for me it was Jiva, it begins with Deha, body, then he talks about Dehi, what is within the body, then he talks of Atma, that which is immortal, this which is within your bottle is immortal, then he says Jiva Atma, the word sort of emerges, it's not exactly the way we use it today, but Jivatma is inside me, but then I suddenly realize he's also talking about, continuously the word para is coming, the other, so see the Atma in the other, so it is not just me, but also you, and so Paramatma is, I would always have a problem that when people will say, only God loves me. And I would find it
I love
only God. And I'm like, okay, so you don't love your friends? And you don't love your families? What a selfish and cruel, this bhakti literature sometimes can be read like this, that only God loves me and I love God and this is the true relationship and everything.
You were saying that the other day, the Mere to Girdhar Gopal.
So I would always say that we are reading this obsession with this one and everybody else is rendered irrelevant, invalid. And I think if I was your brother and you would say this song, I would say, excuse me, you think our relationship doesn't matter?
Dusra no koi.
Dusra no koi? What is this dusra no koi? And suddenly para atma becomes param atma, because other, as many people around me, the more divinity I can see, it goes towards infinity. So para atma becomes paramatma. And so Krishna is telling this self-absorbed warrior that, my dear Priyo, it's not just about you. Stop being so self-obsessed. As a prince, you are part of an ecosystem. You are entitled, you are privileged, you are rich and powerful. You're fighting not just for your property, but you are part of a kingdom. People depend on you. The Sanjayas of the world need you to be fair and just and good. And this battle is also about that.
I think it's very important that you explain all these things in your book. I really enjoyed that whole section of how you flowchart it into the Para Atma and the Paramatma, because this is a major misperception. I mean, also, technically, if everything is Atma, there is no Paramatma.
Yes.
I mean, if you push it to that, if
rational,
Atma, if there is identity, then Paramatma is an illusion, and so is Paratma.
Absolutely.
There is just Atma. Right?
Absolutely. So that, when I was structuring the book, I mean, I was approaching it why, and in fact, I got the idea in one of our very early conversations. You said that how Krishna is not presented as God, and he starts building up. He doesn't immediately use the word Atma. He begins with Dehi, something inside your body, the embodied. And then gradually the word Atma comes, and gradually the word Bhagavan emerges, and gradually he becomes. And there is a structure between the first verse and the 700 verse. It's not random collection of verses. And so when I was doing the structuring, the standard structuring is, of course, Karma Yoga, then there is Bhakti Yoga, and there is Jnana Yoga. But I said, why first Karma? Why second Bhakti? Why third Jnana? These were the questions. And I started noticing the pattern of moving. It is continuously moving between the inside and the outside. So he talks about Yagna. And for me, the more I read about Yagna, for me it is exchange. Because animals don't exchange, humans exchange, or animals exchange in a very limited capacity. Yagna for me is exchange. I give, I receive. The transaction.
Yes.
And it can be at many levels, emotional transactions, intellectual transactions, not just material transactions. But in order to do Yagna, you have to do yoga. So from Yagna, he moves to yoga.
But the transaction is not only for self-benefit, it's for the Loka Kalyanam as well.
Everywhere.
So if you please the deities do their jobs,
and
which is
whole
to
cycle.
look after the whole cycle. Yes.
So the cycle is being considered. So Yagna talks of the outside, then suddenly it starts going inside and talks about yoga. When he starts talking about yoga, suddenly Arjun gets nervous. He said, oh, it's very nice, all this yoga business, but you can't always stabilize your mind. And you see an apprehensive, he likes the idea, but the responsibility is too much to bear. You see anxiety, 2-3 dialogues are there suddenly. So it's a conversation, it's not a discourse. And then Krishna suddenly feels this maternal affection for him. This anurag, in Hindi it's anurag, he feels
There's
this.
a lot of affection in it.
And he says, oh my God, you're scared. And when he becomes scared, he becomes the parent. Suddenly the tone shifts and he starts presenting the divinity. He stops being rational and telling, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. He tells, oh, let me show you God. And the tone becomes emotional. So bhakti starts. And it becomes this grand image of God. This becomes this great Vishwarupa. So emotionality enters. And the moment emotionality enters, then he ends with the intellect. And suddenly it becomes intellectual. It's about identity. It is about property. It is about, the gunas start to appear. It is talking about diversity. Different people are different people. You cannot control the world. And it's scary now. But now that you have comforted the child, he's ready to receive a more sophisticated knowledge on identity, diversity, plurality, lack of control.
I think that's also why there's so many repetitions, because sometimes, there is, when we look at it in a more sort of rhetorical manner, we think, why is it repeating so much? Why is it incoherent? But in fact, the way I see it is that Krishna is tactical. Yes. He keeps trying this, he tries this, he tries this. What are all the various ways in which to convince Arjuna? I mean, the arguments and the way he goes from one thought to another thought, the connections are really brilliant. Towards the end, my favorite part in the chapter 18 is when he says, Priyo Asime, you are my love, and he uses words like bhajami, which translators, I think, are afraid to say what it means, which is serve. I mean, why isn't he serving Arjuna? He's standing in the middle of the battlefield and giving a 700 verse speech. When there is bhajami from Arjuna to Krishna, you see the translations are serve. And when there is the other way around, you have the translations of offer. But what is interesting in this whole thing is that it's a relationship. The relationship between Arjuna and Krishna comes out at every point, and it keeps on morphing.
The concept of relationship, because I give and I receive and I give and I receive, which is yagna. So yajna is happening on the battlefield where Krishna, it's not a hierarchical relationship. You know, I always tell people, when you are an educated man and you're talking to someone who is uneducated, should your relationship be one of domination or of submission? Because the person who doesn't know is arguing with the person who knows. And it's a very common thing that we experience in life, right? You see this person who doesn't really has not, like I face it all the time. It's called Twitter. Yeah. So you have someone who has read like half a book and he's arguing, this is not true. And I'm like, okay.
And you can only reply in so many characters.
In 140, what do I tell him? If I say something, he'll say, you're being condescending. He has an argument for everything. He'll throw it back at me. So all you can show him is love.
So this brings us to the point that you have made about egalitarianism, actually.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I see how carefully you have translated Varna. You have differentiated between Varna and Jati. And actually I have done this also, translated Varna as tendencies rather than caste. Because caste is only 4, but Jatis are many. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, see, I don't deny the reality and the horrible nature of the caste system. I am a beneficiary of the caste system. Let's face it, it's there. It's in our society. Now, I can go on breastbeating and browbeating people about, oh my God, I'll do something about it. I don't have to reform or re-endorse it and work towards it. And it will, something which has been established over 2000 years will not go away in 50 years of independence. It will take time. And first step, acknowledge it exists and acknowledge, but the fundamental acknowledgement of human hierarchy. So for me, wisdom, how do I know a person is not wise? For me, because the desire to dominate exists inside him. So a rich man who is dominating, a knowledgeable man who is dominating, a powerful man who wants to dominate. So a big mantri will come with guns when I go to meet him, as if I am going to shoot him. I am not going to shoot him. But he needs the weapons, soldiers around him to frighten me into submission. His desire to dominate shows his powerlessness. And that is not wisdom. Where there is wisdom, there is the Nanga Fakir, the naked wise man, who is not, naked wise person.
Yeah.
Who... Because I notice how you use pronouns,
Yes,
he,
yes,
she.
yes,
And
I
it's-
have she everywhere, yeah.
So, sorry. But the point is, the desire to dominate. Varna Vyavastha is a way of explaining a thing. The world is different. There are different head, hand. When the first time it is used in the Yajurveda and it's used in a particular way, it's like creating a periodic table where you say copper and gold. But then you say gold is more valuable than copper. A scientist will never say that. A businessman will say that. Yes. A scientist will, this is gold, these are the properties of gold, this is copper, these are the properties of copper. A businessman will say copper is less valuable, or I can make more money out of gold. And this gives me power and privilege. Now that is trade.
Yeah, and this is the interpretation which is the problem. Because a lot of times what happens is they say, well, Gita favors caste differences. And Gita is anti-egalitarian. But it's not the Gita that's anti-egalitarian. It is the person who is looking at it through the anti-egalitarian eyes that thinks that because something comes from the mouth doesn't make it better than something that comes from the foot.
No, it's like...
This is an ancient text written in a certain context.
See, it happens to all religious texts, right? I can say Islam is about terrorism. These simplistic solutions. Now, I'll take one thing and one idea. Oh, now I've solved the world's problem. Gita is caste system. And I'm like, okay, you are making yourself feel powerful. You are not going to solve the problem by this silly tweet.
Yes.
As you can see, I love Twitter. I love Twitter. It's like a study in human condition. Yeah.
I remember I was having an argument with somebody on Twitter and you suddenly jumped in out of nowhere.
Yeah, I remember something some time ago. Because
Yeah.
I was just amused by they don't know who they are talking. Just do some research. There's something called Google on the next window. But we don't want to see Google. We want to just do Twitter because we know everything. Google is inside us.
Actually, I don't think people read articles anymore. They just read the headlines. And the dangerous part of that is that the headlines are written by the editors, not by the writer who has done the articles. So,
no, and I can. The problem is we are too busy having opinions. The more you read, the less opinions you will have. Because you will realize the world is so complex. Like Rajas, Tamas and Sattva. We use Tamasa in the negative sense without realizing in many scriptures Shiva is called Tamasopati.
And all three gunas are in
All in
people,
everybody.
yes.
So you want hierarchy all the time. If I show you 2 bottles or 2 chairs, hierarchy is created. Is this better or that better? The desire to create hierarchy comes from the desire to dominate, which is our animal nature. And that means we have not outgrown and we are fettered by this desire to be a pashu, to be the alpha, to dominate. And that is what I see when I'm talking about monastic orders and all that. While the meaning of it, sorry, I go back there because the meaning is vairagya. Go away from the world. Ultimately, the Gurujis become the center of attention in the ashram. And they become the center of everybody dances around them. And that's a new Rasa Leela that emerges. Which is not the point. The point is Vairagya is a state of mind and freedom from desire to dominate, freedom from wanting to control
And
you.
see, if you go by the Gita, by attachment. I mean,
Detachment, which is
Detachment,
detachment,
yes,
which is the
anasa.
word. Do the job for the larger narrative, not for me, my. So it comes back to me, my. So it's, plant the seed. Not because 100 mangoes, because how management is designed is around first phala.
Yes.
First, it's called a vision statement.
Yes.
So you first do the phala, and then you decide, okay, I want 100 mangoes in the garden. So how much labor should I get, and how much I should
do I
do?
get there?
So I'm not enjoying the act of sowing the seed and letting the plant, knowing fully whether all the seeds will not germinate. Some plants will give mangoes, some will not give. It's unpredictable. Unpredictability is not allowed in management.
So considering that all of these various topics which we're talking about that the Gita has over and beyond the focus that has been there in the past, what is it that makes it a religious text? Do you think it is not a religious text, for example? Would you go with that idea?
Well, it is. How do you define religion? For me, religion is a set of rules that you impose, which you assume has supernatural authority.
Which this has none.
None,
Yes.
because you can see it whichever way you like. You can, if you want to make it a religious text, make it a religious text. What I see when people use words like religion, they mean that, oh, you can't mess with it. Now that's the meaning. Power is there. There's a power notion, but the opposite is also true.
That's actually been the problem for translations.
No, but the problem, I'll give you the other opposite. If it's not sacred text, then some people can be really rudely irreverent.
Okay.
They take a text and they are very abusive about it. I've seen some writers, because it's very pomo, it's very postmodern. I can do anything with the text. So it goes to the other extreme. From the authoritative approach where this is sacred, don't touch it, to I can play with it, ruin it, tear it into pieces, make fun of it, mock it because I have the freedom.
Yes.
So these are the two extremes that you find. Is there a third possibility where I respect the fact that for this person, for you, Gita is God's word. For him, Gita is Krishna's word. For him, Gita is literature. For her, it is something else. For that person, it's something else. I want to appreciate your Gita.
Yes.
And my Gita is great for me, but your Gita is great for you, and let's inform each other in samvad. Not say that my Gita is the correct version. I have a problem there.
So this is actually within a universe of fidelity where you have a whole level of expectations, one for translation, one for commentaries, one for retellings. I think both of us come in still within the reverential, within the respect to the tradition, and still try to break from it. Pushpa Viman.
Pushpaka Viman. We invented it. In Bangalore.
Yeah. So I was saying we still come in within a certain frame that we've drawn. For me, it was previous translations, they don't even delete the word indeed because it's a sacred text and you cannot remove it. And, they have to have every single epithet of Krishna. So I have taken liberties with some of those things and not with some other things. So that's a judgment call.
Yeah, because see, you and I are part of this tradition. Now, when I am seeing someone who is not raised in India, not familiar with this thing, they will translate it very differently. So long as there is a sense of respect. It's like if I were to write on the Maasai tribals of Africa, I don't need to make fun of them. I will approach them as there is their God, their deity, their worship. When I am approaching it, I cannot establish my frameworks onto them, my hierarchies onto them. I have to study them for who they are. Today's scholarship is not that. Many scholars are imposing their own worldviews into their scholarship. They are not separating. This is my worldview, this is their worldview. I am trying to, and of course you can have a commentary saying that I don't like this worldview or I feel there's a problem with this worldview. But it is their worldview.
I think it's complicated also by the identity of the scholar. Sometimes the insider, outsider, which is not judged through the work but through the appearance of the person. A lot of times insiders as in insiders to the heritage, may take certain liberties with the text and it's acceptable because they are insiders. Whereas the same statement made by somebody from outside becomes unacceptable.
See, it's I can crack jokes about my mother.
Yes.
You can't crack jokes about my mother.
Yes.
So freedom of speech is all fine, but my mummy, mere paas maa hai. So that's the whole problem. Very nice to talk about free speech, but we forget I will be very angry if you crack a joke about my mother.
So this is where the territories come in.
This is where territories come, not
and
that.
when knowledge is without territories, technically.
Yeah. So unless I have vairagya, where I don't see my mother as my mother and I'm not attached to her, then I will let others also crack jokes about her. But I have not reached that stage. You have to respect the fact that I'm not as evolved as... When we are all evolved, we can all say anything that we want and live in this magical world called free speech.
So is that why you don't write about Greek mythology or any other mythology?
Well, I do, but no publisher wants to publish it. He's a brown skin. Can you imagine me with a brown skin telling the Greeks, this is your mythology?
Yeah, don't you tell us who is Aphrodite.
Don't tell me. Who are you to tell? So that is the politics of publications. And that is, I'm fully aware of it. I'm not stupid. I'm very aware that so long as I'm writing about Hindu gods, it's okay. The moment I write about... I have written columns on Islam and I've been, because for me, Islamic mythology, Abrahamic mythology, my talks, my TED talks, I talk about Greek mythology, but I can almost see the audience feeling a little awkward because the outsider is telling about them because they are used to the other way conversation.
Yeah.
But that's part of life. No, it's not going to change. This is the way the world is.
And the form also makes a difference. If you're writing from a genre of poetry, you can pretty much write about anything.
Yes.
Within certain constraints.
In the poetry. Yes. See, it's, in the story, the Karna character in the Mahabharata is the outsider who's entering the royal family. And he's now cocky and sitting there with the kings. The other royal members not liking it. We might feel sorry for Karna. But the fact is there are many Karnas in our lives. Tomorrow, we have staff. We are used to, in a country of like India, we are privileged. We have got maids and staff and cooks. And tomorrow the cook's child gets a scholarship, studies well, and is going to go to the same school as your child is. You start seeing the power politics emerging. The Right to Education Act has revealed that. Which is that it's very nice to talk about Karna as a novel. But in our day-to-day lives, we are Karanas to others, and others are Karanas to us. And we are very okay killing them.
Yeah. So very much brings us back to the theme of my Gita and your Gita. I don't know how we're doing on time, and should we move it to questions? Plenty of time.
Okay, good.
Oh,
great,
wonderful.
Great.
Okay, so we have somebody. I was wondering how...
There's abundance in Bangalore Literature Festival.
Okay. So now in your Gita, I find that you have brought in, for example, the Ramayana.
Yes.
And that for me was quite an experience. Suddenly coming into a discussion of Hanuman and Rava and what's happening in these, the Sita and Rama in his heart. That is very interesting because from today's point of view, I mean, we are located today in 2015. And so suddenly the context of the Gita becomes all of our history.
See,
could you comment on that?
See, there is stories. We are told Vyasa wrote the stories because he wanted the Vedic idea to reach everybody. And everybody knows that storytelling, like I have been telling stories for the last 10 years. If I tell an audience I'm going to tell you a story, there is immediately a physical reaction in the audience. I think something about a brain perks up because human mind accepts knowledge through stories. And Vyasa recognized it, and therefore the Pancham Vedas, Puranas were written. I'll pause. stories are written, and so the reverse is also true, right? So if I look at the stories, I should go to the Vedic thought.
Yes.
But while we say this in principle, we assume, we look at Ramayana as independent of the Mahabharata and Mahabharata as independent of the Gita, and we are separating them when really Gita is like the seed which transforms into a fruit, and the fruit gives rise to a seed. So bija and phala.
So you have placed it in actually a pivotal position in the history of Indian.
So let me explain what I'm trying to say. So for me, Ramayana and Mahabharata are narrative expressions of Vedic thought. And Gita is a theory of the Vedic thought articulated in a theoretical way, which is manifested through stories. So Ramayana and Mahabharata. So it's articulated in a particular way. So I'm going the reverse way. I have come from stories and I'm seeing the Gita in them. So I see suddenly Hanuman as the character emerging in the Ramayana. You see, unlike Greek epics, in Greek epics the hero transforms. He goes through a crisis and he goes through a transformation. In Ramayana and Mahabharata, the protagonist is not a hero. I keep telling in all my workshops on storytelling, Ram and Krishna are Bhagavan. They do not transform. They know everything. Yes. It is the people around them who transform. And the biggest transformation in the Ramayana is of Hanuman, the Vanara who becomes Nara and discovers Narayana. That's the transition. While Ravana, being the Veda scholar, does not get it. He knows he's a Pathak. He memorizes it. He knows every Veda, but he doesn't get the Vedic idea. Therefore, my is obsession. While Hanuman he's not talking about my at all. Right. He doesn't, why is he burning his own tail? For someone else's wife. He doesn't get it. This innocence, therefore in the Shaiva tradition he started being associated with Shiva because like Bholenath, he is helping others and not asking for anything in exchange. When he's given pearls, he's saying his Ram inside it. The innocence of it. Yeah. That's Hanuman. And then you come to the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, Krishna is trying to give Gyan to Arjun. The great God is the teacher and yet Arjun doesn't get it. The tragedy of the Mahabharata is for me, Anu Gita. The Anu Gita, where Krishna is also telling the Gita the second time in the Ashwamedha Parva, where imagine Arjun comes to him and tells him, अच्छा वापस वो समरी में बताओ मेरे को याद नहीं आया वो थोड़ा ब्रीफ में बता दो सर you know, and I can imagine the Krishna's exasperation and horror. 700 verses, okay, 500
including a Vishwarupam.
I mean, demonstration was happening and you didn't get, you want to sort of repeat karo, and he gives the Anu Gita and you are like, you can see the sad teacher saying that I spent so much energy. You know, Rama didn't do anything and Hanuman just from a monkey becomes Bhagavan. Krishna is teaching Arjuna and Arjuna remains the child. He is not the smart kid. He's just not, he's a great archer, but udhar hi hai. Yes. Even God can't transform him. Which is so humbling, it's so humorous, it's so gentle. And Krishna says, okay, fine, I will tell you. And he uses 36 chapters. Poor man speaks for 36 chapters. 18 chapters, 36 chapters. And Arjuna is like, very nice. Kuch samajh mein nahi aaya, but bahut bacha laga.
Yeah, no, I guess my point is also that very interestingly how you bring in all these contexts from all the various narratives because, see, one of the things that I actually loved about the Gita is that it doesn't have 200 citations.
Yes.
You know, like many of our authoritative texts, like, you know, philosophical texts, they will refer to this was in this sutra and that was in that sutra and everything is like an off-take from a previous conversation. Yes. Whereas the Gita simply tells you in very abstract terms, even though there is a narrative and there is like a plot, yes, a thin plot, but a plot, it's a dialogue or a monologue. And it just tells you all the abstract bits. What you've done is you've taken those abstractions and you've given almost like, abhi example dekho. Now here is an example of how detachment works.
Yes.
Or here is an example of, see, when Arjuna is saying, why is it that people continue to do bad things even if they know that it's bad? You say, maybe he was thinking of what happened to his brother. You know, you bring in sort of a psychological side and a contextual side, which makes it easy for people to understand. And that was one thing I appreciated about what you did.
Thank you. Because, see, I'm a mythologist, not a philosopher. I focus on mythology. For me, stories are critical. Rituals and symbols are more critical, but the problem is in the book format, stories work better. When I'm explaining a symbol, it becomes very difficult to explain in a book, and ritual is almost impossible. So, for example, although I have explained yagna and puja here, rituals are very important. See, for me, the context, nothing exists in a vacuum. What is the historical context of the Gita? Historians have located it in the period after Buddhism.
Yes.
Buddhism is about, what is Buddha's story? Buddha is walking away from his wife and becoming the Buddha. He's rejecting family life. Shiva Purana is the hermit becoming the householder. From Shiva he becomes Shankara, gets married, produces children. Ramayana is about moving from the city to the forest and back to the city. Mahabharata is about born in the jungle, goes to the city, goes back to the jungle, goes back to the city, goes back to the and this continues, and you find this structure in Samaveda. Because this Aranyagana and Gramagana, this structure is so consistent. So storytelling and contextualizing, telling people that there is associated with history, it's associated with storytelling, there's this geometry to it. That gives me, as you can see, it makes me very happy.
No, it's very interesting. But also, our approaches, I think, are sort of diametrically opposite in a sense. If you are looking at structures, I'm looking at deconstruction.
Yes.
You're looking at the text in relation to other texts. I'm going into texture. For me, it's the sound of it. You know, it's the nasato vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate satah. I'm like, wow, how can I get into that? Whereas you might talk about how that might relate to a story in epic or some other Purana or so on. So that's interesting. And so at the end of it, people have both.
So the audience has like my Gita, they have your Gita, and hopefully they'll discover
their own Gitas. Yeah. Should we open it up to questions? Huh?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, the question is, according to the Gita, what is ignorance, what is knowledge? Wow. There are actually many parts of the Gita that talk about that, and this is not really a sort of a bhashya kind of session with a long
But whatever
speech.
is your answer, and I'll give my answer, and he'll discover his
I guess.
answer.
Ignorance is about separation and about avidya. Avidya is about considering yourself as separate and not realizing the unity and oneness with Atman and Ishvara.
For me, ignorance is when you think the relationship is only about you, and wisdom is when you discover that the relationship is also about the other, the Paratma. And the moment I understand that you are important, the relationship is constructed by the two of us, I think then conversations happen.
Yeah.
That's wisdom
Same.
for me. Yeah.
So we both had the same response. Any other questions?
Can someone moderate it?
Maybe start from here. How about the second row, the lady in the second row?
Well, we have two very learned people here, and I'm a fairly ignorant person where these texts are concerned. I have a very simple question. After having studied these texts so vividly and in so much of depth, do you feel that these are actually historical figures which, are there, or is it is mythology?
I see a hierarchy in it, in what you're saying. History is real and mythology is not. Yeah? You're talking to mythologists. There is only mythology. History is just mythology of someone else.
And for me, what I have done is I've entered into the experience of the text. So therefore, until the Vishwarupam, I'm calling Krishna Krishna. After the Vishwarupam, I call him God. So that is from the point of view of Arjuna. So it's within the subjective, objective space.
You talk a lot about the historical and mythological texts as culture of the people. What about the proverbial wisdom, the proverbs of the people? What are your thoughts on how proverbs reflect the culture of the people, the structure of thought in a people?
Yeah, Proverbs express the folk wisdom, absolutely, and actually so do narratives. So do narratives and so do authoritative texts. They all are expressions in different genres and forms.
Well, we express knowledge in different ways. History is one, mythology is one, proverbs, literature, dance, music. So there's no one way. There are many different expressions of culture.
Without a hierarchy between them.
You had mentioned that some people tend to look at a text from the present point of view, not from the age in which it was constructed. Now, when you are drawing upon the world in which it was constructed, isn't that your construction from your present worldview? How can you be so sure that you are looking at it from the point of view of the time that the text was written?
I have never wanted to know what happened in that time.
No, you said about the respect, that you cannot project the ideas of your world at the present moment into the text and then whatever, criticize it or
See, when
praise
you're
it.
judging the text, but when you're understanding the text, there are two different approaches. If you're
No,
judging it, it's different. But when I want to appreciate it, I can only appreciate it from my point of view.
So only from your present state of whatever knowledge you have at the moment.
So it's like I cannot look at an idea of equality at a text which is not familiar with these ideas in the sense that we understand it today. So it's about how do you see it. They saw it this way, I see it this way. Doesn't make my approach better than theirs and their approach better than mine. There's different context, different context. Appreciate the context. That's the whole idea of mine and yours and his
No,
and theirs.
I do understand that, but the appreciating the context is already conditioned by the fact that you're looking at that context.
Is there an
from your-
alternative? Is there an alternative?
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you. Do you think there
We
is
are
a
definitely
way?
a part of our own context, yes.
Thank you.
I heard a lot of story and transformation, your Gita, my Gita. I would like to know personally from your end, what is the religion dharma you're born into? And what is the religion dharma you're constructed and what you're now? And what is the religion dharma you're going to transform to the near future? Devdutt, since you're good at storytelling, I would like to hear from you. Yeah.
Well, I came from a background where all my parents wanted me to be was a doctor because I was I was a good student. So you either become a doctor or an engineer, you become a doctor. And I don't think we had a puja room in the house and we weren't particularly religious. We did all kinds of puja and in fact, when I started, but I decided I want to study mythology. So my mother thought I was a fool. I will starve. So she always found it very amusing that I'm doing mythology and saying, you'll be a beggar. You're a doctor, study. So like I'm sure there are many young students over here who face this problem. And I discovered mythology. I discovered this whole world of magic and wonder. Today, I'm not a doctor. I'm sitting on a stage writing on mythology, which is storyteller. And I think in the future, what will I be? I think I would like to be someone who keeps doing this in a far more nuanced way, because my writing has also shifted over the years. And I think I'll be doing the same thing, but very differently. So I'll be same, but different. Yeah?
I think I should probably take that answer as well. For me, I used to be a professional in marketing and advertising, which about 10 years ago, I stopped doing that and turned to study. And since then, I've been studying. At the moment, I'm doing a PhD in religious studies. My interest is in Sanskrit and in many of our traditions' texts. As for the future, I don't know. It is. I call it Hari Cha. It is not in my hands, and I also don't have a plan for it. But sadhana is important for me. And self-discovery is what is my most important goal right now. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. I am puzzled about one thing, and that is that a great many religious, spiritual texts arise from a narrative of conflict. I'm not sure why. Is that for dramatic effect? Or is there something deeper than that?
Thank you. If you look at samsara or life, if you read some of the early Vedic writings, they'll always talk about the first life form. If you think of what is the difference? Sorry, I'll just take a little. A jiva, that which has no life is not hungry. That which has life is hungry. That which is hungry is always going to consume something else, in effect depriving something else of its life. And therefore, it's when you amplify this conflict, so the plant will devour the elements, the animals will devour the plants, the humans will devour the animals and the plants, and will end up devouring each other through property dispute. So it's just that cycle, and when you reflect, you will reflect on this. So the Vedic parampara has always been obsessed with the act of eating. The sheer act of eating is conflict, which we don't realize. The act of nourishment, that which nourishes you, is born of conflict. And therefore, when you're seeking shanti, do you stop nourishing yourself because you will not have to kill? Bali will not bear, because where there is Bali, where there is bhuk or bhakshana, which is hunger, there is bhoga. Where there is bhoga, there is going to be Bali. Where there is Bali, there is going to be karma. You want to destroy karma, you have to stop Bali. If you stop Bali, you will not have bhog. If you don't have bhog, what will you do for your hunger? And that's the narrative. Therefore, conflict is always part of spirituality. You can't escape it. You can run away from the family, but the family will not run away from you.
I think the Gita's message is not so much about shanti, but it's about equanimity in attitude. And it's the detachment from, from fear.
Yeah. I think that is like hunger, fear. They are continuously talking about hunger and fear. These are the emotions that are you cannot understand Vedic thought unless you immerse yourself in. I always tell people it's Vijnana Bhairava. Knowledge is associated with Bhairava, the lord of terror, because he terrifies you. He makes you aware of your insecurities and your desire to dominate. So I think that's so conflict will always be there. Without Mahabharata, there cannot be Gita. I think we should. That's it.
Thank you.
On that note, thank you very
so
much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, in the times we live in, where the nation plays jury every night, because the nation wants to know, it has a vivada every night. What a wonderful samvada we have had. Can we please hear it for Devdutt Pattanaik, and so ably moderated by Mani Rao. Thank you for really reassuring us that all is well. Thank you indeed. There are many parallel sessions going on, and I'm so glad, but please do not leave at this moment. I would request the audience to stay back, because there is a solemn moment that we all have to observe. Needs no telling that one of the most progressive writers of our times, Vachana Sahitya scholar, Sahitya Akademi Puraskritaru, Shri M.M. Kalburgi, whose voice was silenced. Can we observe a 2-minute silence in his memory? Thank you. I request you to take your seats. Bangalore Literature Festival is in fact the very first congregation of writers, thinkers, thought leaders after that sad demise. I thank you once again. I would also like to inform the audience that there are parallel sessions going on. I hope you have a copy of the schedule. If you do not, then please make sure that you get someone in that white t-shirt, volunteers of BLF, and get a schedule for yourself. We are about to begin the session with Nandan Nilekani in about a few minutes from now. Meanwhile, Ravi, about 5 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay, we reassemble here after 10 minutes. For your information, FYI, this is the left wing. There is also the right wing, but I'm not saying anything more. It is just humor, BLF humor. Right, so we are going to be here back in about 10 minutes from now, and we will start the session. Thank you.